My name is Nader Dabit, and I've been a software developer for about 10 years. My last 3 years, a little over 3 years, maybe 3.5, I was at AWS working on the front-end web and mobile team, and I recently transitioned into the Web3 space about 6 months ago. Really completely different shift in my career, and I've really had a fun time doing it. And I kind of want to talk about the reasons why someone like me would turn down, other interesting offers and more quote-unquote like secure types of jobs to kind of take a role at a startup that was really only about a month old. So my talk is called The Blueprint, and I want to talk about how Web3 is reshaping the internet, and kind of these are my perspectives, of course, and this is just kind of, a lot of the interesting stuff that I am having fun working with. So I kind of want to go over that today with you all. So a lot of times you will hear the terms Web3 and decentralized web kind of like tossed around, with each other. So a lot of times when you hear Web3, you'll also hear decentralized web and vice versa. So really what I want to talk about today is kind of like what all this means and what types of applications are being built and what the future of a lot of these platforms is kind of looking like. So before we kind of talk about Web3, let's talk about why this term even exists, because this is actually really kind of new to me as well. I just started kind of understanding and hearing about people partitioning the history of the web into 3 separate time frames, I guess you could say. Web 1, the read-only web, this was kind of like the early web where most people were not creators. If you were a creator, you were typically like a developer. And the average person like myself or you would be just reading information, reading text. This was the web up until around 2003, 2004, 2005-ish, when we then started seeing more dynamic applications being built. So Web 2.0 is kind of like where we are today, where we have millions of users that are actually starting to become creators, because you no longer need to be a developer to be a creator. You can just use a platform like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all these different applications that are out there, even blogging platforms, and you could think of WordPress. It enables developers to build platforms that enable users to be creators themselves. And while the internet has really thrived because of a lot of the really interesting stuff that has happened over the last few years, one of the underlying fundamental reasons that it's thrived is because of native protocols that we kind of use every day as developers. So a lot of these protocols are things that we might even take for granted at this point. Protocols like HTTP, FTP, SSH, TCP. One of the reasons that these protocols have really been so successful is because they are widely adopted and they're not subject to change. So if I build a site using HTTP, I can trust that anybody in the world can access it and use it without any centralized intermediary. We can just trust that it's going to work. And while we had the ability to do things like upload text files, attach them to addresses, make them accessible, there were a couple of major pieces of native functionality that were missing. Do you have any water, by the way? Okay, thank you. My mouth is getting a little dry. So yeah, while we had the ability to do all this stuff, there were a couple of major pieces of functionality that were missing. Native payments and native state. And to get around this, we typically have built over the course of the last few or dozen or so years, massively complex infrastructure to enable these things. So imagine sending a payment from here in the United States to someone back in my father's hometown of Ramallah, Palestine. Imagine all of the complex infrastructure that needs to be put in place just for me to walk into a bank, send money and have someone there be able to take it out and use it. Not only do you have to think about the banking system itself, but all the software like PayPal, Stripe, all these things that have to be put in place. And when you kind of put all of it together, it really becomes this massively complex web of infrastructure. In addition to that, native state is something that you can now do with smart contracts. So in order to deal with state in the past, what we've basically done is we build a server in our living room or our garage, or maybe we spin up a server on some cloud provider somewhere. And we have now a database that we store things in. Now, there are a lot of really great things about this, but there are a few drawbacks as well. We typically have a single point of failure. So if anything happens to this database, it goes down, our entire application goes down. We also don't have full control over, thank you. over this infrastructure a lot of times, things happen that are outside of our control that take down our applications. So to put it simply, you could think of Web3 as the stack of protocols that enable developers to build fully decentralized applications. And I really like this definition because it kind of puts it very concisely, because when you start listening to people talking about Web3, they often, vary from all types of different things that they try to put into the category of Web3. A lot of it's cryptic, a lot of it has to do with software, but a lot of it has nothing to do with software at all. So what are the characteristics of some of these applications? Well, you'll hear the term decentralized thrown around a lot, and I think that it's very, very important though, because a lot of the ideas around decentralization not only have to do with the types of applications that we're building, but also the types of communities and companies and things being organized in a way that are decentralized. And we're not only decentralizing all of the infrastructure, but we're also decentralizing the ownership of the applications itself. So when you think of a typical web startup or Fortune 500 tech company, you often have ownership that is centered into a small minority of people. Typically, a small percentage of people own a large majority of the company, and a lot of the developers and things like that that have been working on the application of the company typically don't hold a ton of ownership there. Another characteristic is this idea of programmable digital money. So with the smart contract, you can easily transact payments between two parties with just a few lines of code. Self-sovereign identity. Individuals should own and control their identity without any intervening centralized authority. Distributed, trustless, and robust infrastructure, meaning that if one of my servers goes down or a dozen servers go down, we want our application to still be up and running. And having to do with all things open, really, this idea of open source software is really great, but what if we could have open source backends and open backends that anyone can build upon, and we can now have programmable backends that not only the company that built this application can use, but any developer could then start using and plugging together like building, like Lego blocks kind of. And this leads to applications being able to compete on backends for front ends. So if there are multiple backends that are all accessible for anyone to use and build upon, that means that we as front-end developers, because I'm really a front-end developer, can kind of build out interesting new applications of this backend or new experiences on top of this backend. And one of the characteristics you'll often see is that a lot of the way that these applications are enabled are through tokenization. So what are some of the types of applications that I'm talking about here? Well, gaming is a really interesting use case because you actually see really, really successful companies already being built in this way. So taking it back to, this isn't really like a Web3 game, but let's look at Fortnite as an interesting case study. If you have used Fortnite or you have children like myself that play Fortnite, when Fortnite first came out, it was really interesting because it was free. And we just downloaded it and I was like, yes, this is awesome. It's a free game. I don't have to pay 80 or 90 bucks for it. But in reality, if you have kids, you know that 80 or 90 bucks would have been a lot cheaper than all of the money you spent buying in-game currency or in-game skins. And all of this money starts adding up. We've spent hundreds of dollars and maybe even more buying in-game currency and skins, which is fine, I guess. But 100% of this money is going to this centralized platform, and when we're done using this application and my child outgrows it, we don't have anything to show for it other than a good time, which I guess is fine. But what if we can kind of make this more interesting and more valuable for the users that are taking time out of their day to interact with these applications? Well, Axie Infinity is a Web3 game that kind of does just this. People that play the game can not only earn currency from within the game that is then able to be sold on a liquid market, but any items that they buy within the game, they get to keep. And only 4.25% of the transaction costs go back to the platform, and 95% of the money being spent within the platform goes back to the users. Now, this has been really interesting because a lot of people playing this game outside of the United States in places where maybe they don't make the type of money that you see being made here, have been able to actually quit their jobs and play Axie Infinity full time. Philippines is a country where there's a lot of an Axie Infinity community there. A lot of people there in other parts of Asia especially have done this. And more interestingly enough, even if you are living here or anywhere and you want to play this game, when you are done playing it, you can then have these digital assets that you can resell on a, again, liquid market. And then you have kind of more incentive to play this game maybe versus other games. And this isn't just kind of like a theoretical thing. Axie Infinity has over 2 million daily active users. And their growth has continued to skyrocket, especially in the last 2 or 3 months. They've had over $500 and $750 million per month, respectively, of revenue generated through this game. Again, 95% of that money going back to the users playing the game. Now, not everyone is bought into Web3 gaming yet, but you're starting to kind of see this domino effect of people that are in gaming. So, for instance, the founder of Zynga said play to earn and play to win is the next evolution of freemium. And Ryan Watt, the head of YouTube Gaming, said that I'm bullish on NFTs. NFTs are kind of how the in-game assets are often transferred, along with ERC20 tokens, which are kind of like, I would say, cryptocurrency built on Ethereum. And we're going to talk about a little bit around some of the environmental impact around digital currencies at the end of this talk, if you're interested in that as well. So like gaming is one interesting application of this. You're also seeing like the Web3ification of a lot of other Web2 quote unquote types of applications. So for instance, Spotify. Almost all of the money that's sent to Spotify does not go to the creators. It goes to other parties like the actual Spotify shareholders and oftentimes to the record label people that have kind of like created the different contracts with the artists. Audius is geared more towards having the ability to pay the creators directly and having audiences be able to support them directly as well. So as a creator, not only can you have the ability to earn the typical revenue streams that you would from streaming, but you can also make extra money by having a streaming track that is trending that week. As a user of the actual app, you can create a playlist, and if people use it a lot, you also get paid in the digital token, which is Audius. But the most interesting aspect right now to me around Audius is that they are creating this like fan club thing. And when you think of something like OnlyFans, imagine that being applied to creators that are focused on music. So you as a creator can maybe create content, especially for your fans, that they can access it earlier than everyone else. And it's kind of like this direct to creator from the consumer platform, which is pretty interesting. And they have over 5.5 or 6 million monthly active users and over 100,000 artists already. Blogging, mirror.xyz is pretty interesting. It's starting to gain popularity as well. It allows people that are writing to earn tokens, but it also allows them to do crowdfunding directly from within the platform. And we've now seen multi-million-dollar companies crowdfunded from a blog post. So people are writing a blog post, they have the ability to raise funds directly, and not only are they, of course, getting that money, but people are essentially able to invest directly in someone's idea through a blog, which is really interesting to me. DeFi and stable currencies are really kind of what people think about when they hear about smart contracts a lot of times. So why does this even matter? Well, a lot of my family is in the Middle East, and we've seen a lot of economic refugees directly from people either within our family or close to our family because of the political crisis happening there. Inflation over 90% over the last 2 years. Of course, you've probably heard of Venezuela and other parts of the world that have it even worse. Well, when I heard of cryptocurrency, I typically thought of Bitcoin going up and down every day and forests burning, when in reality, there are actual stable coins that are pegged to assets in the real world, like the US dollar. And there are many, and almost all of the smart contract platforms are using environmentally friendly consensus mechanisms. So if you are someone that lives in Lebanon and you don't want your money to not only go down in value, but also not be locked in the bank, which is kind of what is happening, you can choose, if you're working digitally in a Web3 company, to get paid in stable coins. These coins will be pegged to a currency like the US dollar, which is very empowering. Another thing that's very empowering is the idea of helping the 1.7 billion or so people in the world that are unbanked, meaning that they are not allowed to open a bank account. Why are these people not allowed to open a bank account or have access? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the number one reason is discrimination. So if you look at the Global Gender Report of 2020, they noted after their research that 72 countries still don't allow women from specific social groups to even open a bank account, much less participate in the banking, borrowing and lending and all of the other stuff that you typically would like to do to kind of have a normal or whatever life. Well, there are a lot of Web3 companies. Okay, yeah, there are a lot of Web3 companies that allow people to get paid directly in digital currency. So for instance, at the Graph protocol, which I work with closely at Edge and Node, we've given away over $100 million in grants that go to anyone that can either create blog posts, create open source, do anything to kind of help the Web3 and the Graph ecosystem come along. And we can pay them in these digital tokens. And then they can use these tokens in DeFi protocols like Curve, Uniswap, and Aave to earn interest and do all of the other banking stuff without any gatekeeping, I would say, at all. So, you hear about stable coins and crypto. This is kind of the interesting part of that to me. Social media is something that's still coming along. I don't think we've seen the actual true application of social media in Web3, but we definitely can do better than what we're doing in Web2. Web2 social media is built with the sole purpose of exploitation of user data, and we now have a lot of situations where we're essentially seeing surveillance capitalism in real time in our day-to-day lives. It's built by using advertising as a way to create as many clicks as possible by kind of following you around in your life and trying to figure ways out to essentially manipulate you. And also the platforms in general don't give any ownership to the user. So if I go on Facebook or Instagram and I build an audience of 10 million people, they're making a ton of money off of advertising. The only thing I'm able to do is maybe sell a milkshake or diet shake or something online. It's not very empowering to the users. So I think what you're seeing now in social media in Web3, we're starting to see ideas that are going to come into fruition, I think, over the next few years. That's going to change the way we think about Web3. I mean, the way we think, change the way we think about ownership by applying these Web3 ideas. So a glimpse of this is the idea of paying users to use a platform. So Super Rare is a digital art platform that allows people to upload and sell digital artwork in the form of NFTs. They did an airdrop to anyone that had been using the platform over the first course of X number of months or years. And if you had just used the platform, they took a lot of the money that they had made and actually created a token and then just airdropped it to anyone that had used the platform. So if you had just logged into this app, you would have been paid anywhere between a few thousand to tens of thousands of dollars. There was even one person that tweeted out that they had somehow been airdropped like almost 100,000 US dollars from using this platform. It turns the idea of where the ownership is on its head, typically moving it more towards a distributed form of ownership. Gitcoin is another good example. Gitcoin is a platform that allows developers to get paid for helping out with open source. So instead of just contributing to open source, which is what a lot of us do because it's great and we maybe have enough money and time and whatever to do that, but let's say you live somewhere where you actually would like to get paid for that and there's nothing wrong with getting paid. You can actually get paid for your open source contributions, which is pretty interesting. I'm getting kind of close to being there on time, so I'm going to kind of jump through the rest of these. But with the idea of NFTs being kind of still fairly new, and to me when I first heard about them, I thought they were really stupid. I saw that this person named Takawa Shunsuke, he is a digital artist in Japan, and he uses a lot of generative art software. He created a project called Generative Masks, and he used p5.js in 432 lines of code, and he sold a 10,000 unit NFT collection to his network, to his audience on Twitter, and he raised $3 million, and he gave all of that back to his community. He also programmed in a royalty of 10%, so anytime someone sold any of these items, 10% of the money went back to the community as well. So it was a really cool way to kind of generate money, but also give people a form of ownership, because if you bought one of these, you could resell it on the open market. I think it's worth about twice as much as it was the day that it launched. So it gives people, I think, ways to kind of create this idea of raising money, but also giving back to the community and giving people that want to participate in giving something to show for it as well. And it just really creates new incentives, I would say, for ways of doing things. So with Web3 social media, I think it's going to combine a lot of the ideas I just talked about. We're starting to see Jack from Twitter play around with this idea of decentralized Twitter. We're also seeing the founder of Aave, which is one of the most widely used DeFi protocols, multi-billion-dollar protocols, exploring and building now a decentralized Twitter. But I think we're going to see, a handful of decentralized, tokenized social media apps come out in the next couple of years, and I have no idea what that's going to look like. And then the last thing I want to kind of quickly cover is this idea of web infrastructure. So when I think of web infrastructure, I typically think of something like AWS or GCP, where I used to work at AWS. Well, there are also these decentralized and distributed tokenized web infrastructure protocols that are trying to build out what you would typically think of as like serverless infrastructure, but do so more efficiently. So one of the protocols, this is the one I work with closely, is the Graph protocol. It's a decentralized network of nodes that allow developers to build APIs that index and allow the querying of blockchain data. It's now hit over 1 billion queries per day, and it's used by a lot of applications in Web3. Ceramic Network is an off-chain data solution. So instead of storing all of your information on-chain, a lot of times you need off-chain data, like a database. LivePeer is 10 to 50x cheaper for doing live video streaming than something like AWS, and they have a lot of users and a lot of participants in the network, and they have their own token as well. IPFS and Arweave are decentralized storage solutions. Radical is a decentralized Git provider. Identity works a lot different than what we're used to in the Web2 world. Again, instead of handing over our email and our phone number, you typically have a way to identify yourself anonymously if you choose to, using something called a wallet for the most part. And a wallet is really just kind of like an abstraction over public key encryption, where you can create your wallet by getting a private key. The private key mathematically derives a public key, which mathematically derives an address. And your address is your identifier, and you can log in using a wallet without having to kind of hand over your personal information. And finally, IDX is a protocol for setting up user profiles if you do choose to do that, but you have full control over it. Instead of giving the application your information, you point the application to your IDX profile for wherever you would like to use that. So to wrap things up, in addition to some of those things, there are also DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations, which are really interesting to me. The tokenization of physical assets and making them liquid. So for me, a really interesting implementation of this would be something like tokenizing a piece of real estate in New York and allowing anyone to buy into it and sell out of it really easily and really inexpensively. So if I want to buy $100 in a building in Shanghai and someone in Shanghai wants to buy $50 in a building in New York, people are building out these exchanges that enable this and enable people to lower the barrier to entry to financial participation. So the biggest concern I had when coming into this space was environmental concerns. I thought that pretty much crypto is burning the world down. I found out that almost every single smart contract platform is already using or moving towards environmentally friendly consensus mechanisms, except for Ethereum, which is moving towards the environmentally friendly consensus. It's already been merged on a test network, and it should be merged to the mainnet in about 6 months or so. So at that point, really it will be, in my opinion, as efficient or more energy efficient than using the typical wasteful banking system that we have today. Well, that's up for discussion, but really I think that the main concern I have right now is Bitcoin. Bitcoin still uses an environmentally unfriendly consensus mechanism called proof of work, and I'm just not a big fan of it. So, but I typically wouldn't even consider like Bitcoin part of the Web3 space. So anyway, to wrap it up, one of my favorite sayings from Jay-Z is, "I'm not a businessman. I'm not a businessman, I'm a business, comma, man." And I think Web3 enables people to stop being used as a tool from platforms to make money, and instead leverage platforms to make money for themselves. And that's why I'm excited about Web3. And that was a lot, so thank you for following along, and I hope that wasn't too much information in too short of a period of time. But if you have any questions, I would love to talk to you on the side afterwards, and I appreciate you checking out my talk.